Everybody, it's Grit, and today we're going to get into the arrow build game and going over how I go about my arrow builds. So let's get into it. Just wanted to do a quick video on my arrow build process. So if you're like me, there are some things that you just want to be able to do yourself. Whether it is just you want to be able to customize things, or you want the self-satisfaction of having done something yourself, or you just want more options, or you're looking to, in the long run, save money, whatever the reason is. Arrow building is really not that difficult, and is something that you can employ with a small investment. You can employ into your workshop so that you can have the arrows that you want. So I've been doing the archery and bow hunting thing for over 3 decades, and like many of you, I started out, I didn't have any tools, any equipment to do any of the work on bows and or arrows for myself. So I used to go to the pro shop and order a dozen arrows, and I would tell the guy, they would tell the guy at the shop how I wanted them and all that. And that's all well and good. And if you are fine with doing it that way, then fine. That's that. Go to the pro shop and they'll appreciate the business. But sometimes you just want to be able to do things yourself. And arrow building is a good place to start. So first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to order your arrow shafts. And you're going to want to go with a particular arrow spine that is going to fit your bow, your draw length, your arrow weight. Is going to have to fit your particular parameters. So a real quick arrow spine is the stiffness of the arrow. And so the way they do that is they support it on the ends, they hang a weight in the middle, and how much that arrow bends from level is its spine. So an arrow with a larger spine number is a weaker arrow. So a 400 spine, it dips down, it dips down 0.4 inches. A 250 spine only dip down a quarter inch, 0.25 inches. So that 250 is going to be stiffer than a 400. So that's static spine. And there's probably what I think is the greatest, the most useful spine chart out there is the one from Serious Archery. And I'll put pictures of it up. It will take into consideration how much weight you're going to put up front. Most of your spine charts don't do that. They're assuming that you're going to go with 100 grains up front. That's it. That's not very useful if you're going to shoot something heavier than 100 grains up front. I have some arrows with a 100 grain insert. If I put a 200 grain broadhead on that, then I'm looking at 300 grains up front. And if I go off a standard spine chart and it says, oh, I need a 300 spine at 65 pounds, that's probably not going to work. I'm probably going to need something a little stiffer than that. And because it's assuming I'm going with a 300 with a 100 grain head, 100 grains out front, that arrow spine is not going to work. So the Serious spine chart, there are 2 for compound bows. So if you've got a fast, aggressive bow that's well over 300 feet per second, you would use this chart. If you're under that, a slower bow, less aggressive, you're going to use this chart. And you just plot all 3 points, your point weight, your arrow length, and your poundage, and it tells you what spine you need. All right, that's for your static spine. And we'll talk a little bit later about the difference between static spine and dynamic spine. Now, depending on what kind of arrow you're going to build, 3D versus hunting, whatever, and you talk about your FOC and your dynamic spine versus your static spine. Static spine is how much the arrow bends when it is not in motion. So right here, when I bend it, that's static spine. I can put 1,000 grains up here and it's not going to change this. But as soon as I push it and it's under motion, that's when it's going to change the dynamic spine. So things that change the dynamic spine of an arrow are going to be weight up front and the length of the arrow. Those are your two biggest factors. This happens to be a 359 spined arrow. If I were to put, with this 50 grain insert, if I were to put a 200 grain point in front of this on that 50 grain, that's going to be 250 grains up front. At 65 pounds, that's going to weaken the dynamic spine, and that's probably going to affect my arrow flight. So I wouldn't recommend a 350 with that much weight up front. Now, if I am able to shorten it, that's going to stiffen what little arrow I have left. The shorter arrow, now the dynamic spine is stiffer. The actual bending of the arrow, you're just sitting here holding it, doesn't matter how much weight you have up front. It's when it's being pushed from the back and flying through the air. That's the difference between static and dynamic spine. So years ago, I started off with fletching my own aluminum arrows, and I cut them off with this, just an old pipe cutter. Didn't even have an arrow saw, and I believe I picked up my first fletching jig was an Arizona Easy Fletch, and that's when I started doing my own arrow building way back when. Things have changed in the last few decades, and I have kind of refined the process with the purchase of some different equipment. Now, today, the age of the aluminum arrow has now shifted into the carbon arrow, and that little pipe cutter just I don't recommend you use that to cut off your carbon arrows. So what you are going to need at a minimum to get things started is, number one, you're going to need a fletching jig, and we'll talk about fletching jigs here in just a minute. The second thing you'll probably want to get is an arrow saw, and there are lots of different options that are out there. For the longest time, I think I used an Apple cutoff saw, and I've had that so long I actually wore the motor out, and then I picked up a second one. And I've also seen there are lots of other options out there. I think my next one will probably be the mod saw. That has some really nice features that I probably would use. That would be very beneficial. But you don't need to spend a fortune. You can get a good arrow cutoff saw for about $100, and then you need to look at your fletching jig. Now, when it comes to fletching jig, again, there are a lot of different options that are out there. There is, as I mentioned earlier, the first one I got was the Arizona Easy Fletch. I don't use it anymore. I have honed mine down over the years. I had a pair of plastic grayling fletching jigs that were basically plastic versions of the classic Bitzenberger. But here is my Bitzenberger jig. I just have the one. It is a rock solid jig, and it gives you a lot of options that we'll discuss here in just a minute. So if you're just getting into the arrow building and you just want to get your foot in the door, my recommendation would be the Boning Tower jig. I'm sure there are a lot of people who would argue with me, but for a moderate investment, you can get a very simple easy to use jig that comes with multiple clamps, multiple arms, and I'll put in some video overlay of me using this jig. But you can get, which I've just recently purchased. I've had 2 of these jigs, and 2 jigs works real well. So by the time I get one arrow in, the vanes glued and applied onto the shaft, by the time I do the second jig and get it glued and clamped in with the fast set glue that we use today, this arrow is ready to come out, and I can basically just build a dozen as fast as I can install the vanes and glue them down. I can get through a dozen pretty quickly with the 2 jigs. But you can get multiple arms that are easy to change out. These happen to be the helical. They are a right helical. You can get straight. You can get the arms that are made just for the blazer vanes, and you can get the offset. So it gives you a lot of options, and they're really easy to change. The one thing that you can't do with the tower jig is a 4 fletch. So you are stuck with doing a 3 fletch. But if you're happy with the 3 fletch and you don't see yourself ever needing, or at least in the near future, needing a 4 fletch, then the tower jig is a good jig, good solid jig, and a good option. And again, it will do all 3 vanes at once. Now, if you're wanting a jig that might take you a little bit more time, but gives you more options, the Bitzenberger jig is, you can't go wrong with the bits. You can make some adjustments and do the standard 3 fletch. You can, with this just little set screws here, you back one out and drop one in, and you can do a standard evenly distributed 90-90-90 4 fletch, or you can do a 120, which has 2 of the vanes pretty close together and the 2 spread out. You can do a 4 fletch that way. I've never used that. I've never done that. When I do a 4 fletch, I do the 90-90, or I just do the standard 3 fletch. So there are a few different options out there. The other thing the bits will do for you is you can have different clamps. This is a straight clamp. You can get left helical, right helical, or a straight clamp, but you have adjustments where you can move the magnet and alter its pitch so that you can add or reduce the degree offset that you have on it. And the Bitzenberger is a good solid jig. Boning also makes a version of something very similar to the Bitzenberger in a plastic model. I don't have any of those, but some of the reading I've done on it says that is a very good go-between, having the bits, spending the extra money on the bits, or having the tower jig. All right, so let's go ahead and go through my process. Now, some arrow companies will ask you before they ship their shafts off to you to save money against buying a cutoff saw. They'll cut the arrows off for you, which is kind of a nice option if you don't have or are not ready to spend the money on a cutoff saw. But if you don't choose that option, they send you the raw shafts. They're usually going to be somewhere around 32 inches, give or take, about 32 inches long, and then you're just going to have to cut them off. So that's your first step. You have to go with where you want to have that arrow, how long you want that arrow to be. And I'm sure there are gobs of videos on the internet of people using a cutoff saw. I'm not going to bore you with B-roll of putting an arrow in the cutoff saw and cutting that piece of arrow off. But then you'll get your arrow, you'll get it cut. A lot of people will cut both ends so that they make sure they get a good 90-degree cut. It's not a bad idea. I usually don't do that. I've never had any issues but that is something that a lot of people will do. This arrow, after cutting it off, is right at 28.5 inches, and that is carbon to carbon, so no knock, and just behind the insert. All right, so at this point, my next step is going to be to glue in the insert. I use Gorilla Glue for both my inserts and the fletching. There's all kinds of different glues that are out there, but I've found out that the Gorilla Glue, the Super Gel, um, it does great, and it is readily available. You can find it anywhere. I'll get it at the grocery store, the little hardware store down the road. You can pick it up at Walmart. You can find it anywhere, and it does just fine. My first step is going to be gluing the insert into the arrow shaft. Now, one little tip I have when it comes to gluing in the insert, and I go with an insert over the outsert. I use the standard sized carbon arrows. I know a lot of people use the smaller diameter, either the 5 millimeter or smaller diameter shafts. I prefer the standard carbons. Knocks fit in them better. You don't have to order anything special. They're just, and I have so many components already that are for the standard. The 0.24 inch, 6 millimeter inside diameter. That it's just easier to just use those same arrows, because I have piles and gobs of inserts and knocks that they all fit that size, so I just stick with that size. And as soon as a deer complains about the diameter of arrow that I shoot them with, then I might change. Now, for shooting 3D, I'll go to a fatter arrow, of course, to help catch lines. And of course, if you're going to shoot indoor spots, you're probably going to shoot the fattest arrow that you can legally get away with. But one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to rough up the inside. And so here's a little tip. This is a very handy little tool. This simply is just a little T-handle, and it takes this little wire brush. And this wire brush is really just a bore cleaner out of your gun cleaning kit. And it just threads in, and you can take it, you go to a different size arrow, you can grab a different brush out of your gun cleaning kit. And all I do is run it down the inside of the shaft a couple times just to rough the inside up so that glue gets a good bite. So depending what kind of arrow you're building, if you are putting together a strict 3D arrow, you're probably going to go with glue in points. So you'll want to pick the weight for however you want to balance that arrow out with your FOC. If you don't know what FOC is, I've got another video explains about the FOC. But basically it is, your FOC is where your balance point is in relationship to the middle of your arrow. So if you like a higher FOC, you're going to want more weight out in the front end. This arrow is going to be a 3D arrow, but I'm going to be shooting it out of my hunting bow. So I'm going to go with a little bit more weight out front than what I would normally do in a strict 3D setup. So I have already glued in a 50 grain insert, and that is going to be used in conjunction with a 100 grain point. That's going to give me about 150 grains up front. So you choose, if you want to use one of the outserts, you've got a different diameter shaft and it is easier to use the outsert, you want to go with that. Or you can find inserts of all different varieties, 25 grain, 50 grain, all the way out to 200 grain. I think in some cases you can even get a 300 grain insert for those of you who are going to try to kill a hippo or a Cape buffalo or something. But For this particular arrow build, I'm going to go with that 50 grain insert. And on some of my other arrows, I have 100 grain inserts. I'm a little bit, I like that high FOC in a hunting arrow. So that's my choice. Again, you can just go with the standard, 12 grain, 11 grain insert that comes with the arrows. Those work fine, and just shoot a heavier broadhead, if you want that FOC. But something that I do, go right off the bat, I'm going to put 50 grains up in the front. Again, that's all up to your particular wants and needs. As you can tell, I like the wraps, especially on a hunting arrow. I like to be able to see those arrows, and those wraps for me, they do two things. Number one, they're going to make that arrow easier to see after I shoot it, and not so much in the air, but after it's stuck in the ground and I want to start that blood trail if I need to. That wrap is going to make that arrow a little easier to find. If you go with a white wrap, then I like the white wrap too to hunt with, because it's going to show blood and again, still be easier to find. And I think I get a better surface for the glue, for the veins. I think the wraps, it's easier to glue the veins to the wraps than it is to the shaft. Especially, I have found, if it's a shaft that I am refletching. So I've stripped the veins off, and I'm going to refletch those veins with a different set, different color or whatever. Sometimes I have found that it's tricky to get those veins to stick to that shaft after you have scraped those veins off. You can take sandpaper or a little bit of steel wool and rough them up, and you have to clean them with your fingernail polish and some of your arrow prep chemicals. But again, I'm not looking to make things more complicated. I like things to be nice and simple. Throw a wrap on it, you're good. The veins will stick to those wraps very well. And then when you do go to refletch, it's kind of easier to clean off. If you peel the veins and the wraps off, is easier than if the veins are glued straight to the shaft. All right, in the spirit of helping simplify things, here's the next step that I think might ruffle some feathers a little bit. Right now, there is, understandably, and I agree that this can be something that's going to help with your arrow flight, but there's a lot of noise on the internet about nock tuning. I have nothing against nock tuning, but if you're on a schedule and time is of the essence, you're going to nock tune, you're going to want to put in the work, and you're going to have to put in the reps, especially if you're going to bear shaft tune. Now, I am not going to say you shouldn't nock tune and or bear shaft tune, but if you are going to do that, be prepared to put in the time. It is a long, involved task. I have a step that I think, in my experience, and I've only been doing this for the last few years, but I spine index those arrows, those shafts. Every arrow shaft that has the way they're manufactured, they have a direction they are going to bend. Every time you put pressure on them, they're going to bend, and in that same direction every time. And when you shoot an arrow, you are pushing it from the back. It's going to as you put pressure on the back end and all your weight's in the front end, that arrow is going to want to bend. And since the arrows always want to bend in the same direction every time, I think finding that direction can help in the nock tuning process. I think a lot of that nock tuning is getting the nock aligned up with the spine index. And I think if you index them by that spine bend, that is going to make it's going to be a good time saver. Now, the first time I saw or heard anybody that was doing any spine indexing is they were floating their arrows. They put the insert in and the nock in, and they fill their bathtub up, and they would put the arrow in the water, and they would wait for it to settle, and it would always, when it would float, apparently, I never did it because it sounded like a lot of work, but it would always float in the same way. The one side of that arrow shaft would always float to the top, and then you would grab it and mark it, and that just sounded like a lot of work. Then I saw a video where guys were bending their arrows, but it was a two-man job. And here at Grips Archery, I'm a one-man show. They would put the arrow on the ground, on the floor, and take a 2x4 and push on the arrow. And while one individual was pushing on the arrow, the other one would see which way it would bend and would mark on the arrow where it would bend. And then I saw someone else, this isn't me, but I saw someone else on the internet, and they used pipe clamps to apply the pressure to the arrow to get it to bend and mark it. And that, I thought, okay, that is a good fix. I don't have to fill the bathtub. I don't have to find an arrow bending partner. I can just put these arrows in that pipe clamp, tighten them down, see which way they bend, mark them with a Sharpie. I'm good to go. And so if you look closely at these three that I haven't fletched yet, you can see there's a little Sharpie mark. Don't know if you can see it. There's a little Sharpie mark right there on that arrow. And I have put this arrow in the bender. I'll probably I'll put some pictures on top, but that's how that works. I screw in a field point. I drilled a little bitty hole, just a dimple of a hole on the surface of both of the pipe clamps, and I put a field point, thread a field point in, and I put an insert with a field point in this end, and those points line up in the holes, and I give that pipe clamp a turn, and that arrow bends, and I'm telling you it'll bend, and then I'll release the tension and turn it, and I'll bend it, and as soon as it'll bend to me every time, and I can turn it, and it'll bend this way, and I'll turn it and bend it, and it'll bend to me, and I'll take the tension off, hit it again, it'll bend right to me. And as soon as it does that, I take my little silver Sharpie and I put a mark on it, and now I know which way that arrow is going to bend before I ever fletch it. And I think that saves me a lot of time when it comes to nock tuning and setting up those arrows. Now we come down to fletching. You've got some options. You have a lot of options. First, 3 versus 4. If you're okay with your FOC and you can stand to have a little bit more weight on the back end, there's nothing wrong with fletching with 4. I have a lot of arrows that are 4 fletched. 3 fletched, if you're really wanting to play that FOC game, then you're probably going to want to just go with a 3 fletch so you don't have as much weight on the back end, taking away a little bit of your FOC. That's if you're really, really wanting to tweak and get as much FOC as you can possibly squeak out of your arrow setup. Your other options, of course, are your thousands of different vane varieties, blazer vanes and your tack vanes, and there's all kinds. I'm not going to try to even begin to list them all, but there are a bunch out there. This year, I'm going to try the Boning Alphas. That's their new vane for 2025. And so far, the few that I've fletched up, now they seem to be flying pretty well. That's what I'm going to go with this year. But again, that's going to be up to you. And the color combinations, some people like to have one. If you're doing a 3, they want the cock feather to be a different color than the other 2. That's fine. A lot of people will do all three in the same color so that if they are noctuning and they're twisting, then all of a sudden they don't have that cock feather out of alignment. It just all depends on what you want to do. But the hard and fast rule is, whichever one you go with. There's a lot of talk nowadays about left, either left offset or left helical versus right offset or helical. You can also fletch straight. I wouldn't, in my opinion, I wouldn't do a hunting arrow with a straight fletch, especially with a fixed bladed broadhead. I want that arrow spinning to give it the stability. And the best way to get it spinning is to have an offset or a helical. There's a lot of discussion with, do you want to go with a left or a right? If you're shooting a mechanical broadhead or you're shooting a fixed bladed head that has a double bevel, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of talk about certain bows with certain strings that they naturally want to cast the arrow. For a right-handed archer, it's naturally going to cast and start to spin left, and so they just want to continue that. I tell you what, Average Jack Archery, Nate Sellers, did a great video on the difference between right and left. The long and short of it is, it doesn't matter. The only time it matters is if you have a single bevel broadhead. If you have a right bevel, then you want a right helical or a right offset. And the reason being, of course, is this is a right bevel broadhead. And because the blades aren't even, when the air hits this angle, it's going to turn that, it's going to push on that broadhead, which is one of the advantages, they say, to having a single bevel broadhead is it wants to turn inside the body. As soon as it hits meat and bone, it wants to spin. Well, it's going to do the same thing in air. Air is not as thick as an animal's body, but as tissue, but it's still going to apply a force on this edge and get that blade to spin. So you want your vanes to be, or fletching to be, offset to the right as well, so that they work together. If your blade is wanting the arrow to spin this way and your fletching is wanting the arrow to spin that way, now they're working against each other, and that's probably going to cause a lot of heartache and hassle. Okay, so at this point, you have your arrows cut off. We have the insert glued in. We have the spine tested, spine indexed. Our wrap is put on, and now all we have left is to fletch. So depending on what jig you're going to use, like I said, there's lots out there. Bitzenberger, the boning tower jig, the pro clamp, the pro jig. There's a variety of fletching jigs that are out there. Whichever one you go with, and whichever vane or feathers or 3 or 4 or whatever it is you want to do, I've used all of them. I've done real feathers. I've 4 fletched. I've 3 fletched. So that's all just going to be up to you. Whatever color combinations you want. That's the beauty of it. If you're building your own, you can do whatever you want with them. So all we have left is to fletch. So as I said earlier, I'm a fan of the Gorilla Glue. I use the super glue gel. It works very well. I have found out that the thinner you can lay it on, the better. You can definitely over glue. And so typically what I like to try to do, and I'll try to do a little visual, but if I have a vane in this clamp, then instead of laying down a complete strip of glue, I like to put a drop of gel about every 3/4 of an inch or so. And then I use the tip of the bottle to spread those drops out to get a nice thin layer of that glue. And you have to work pretty fast because it starts to set up pretty quickly. And then set it in the clamp. Usually, with this fast set glue, as I was mentioning earlier in the tower jig, if I'm using the tower jig, by the time I get one in the clamp and I set the other one up, put the vanes in, glue the vanes, put the arrow in, make sure my index is lined up, and close those clamps and put it on. By the time I finish all that, the other jig is dry. And so I can pretty much just run right through them. The Bitzenberger, obviously, you're only doing one at a time. So I usually let that sit in there for about 5 minutes. And then I take the clamp out, I rotate it over, and just simply rotate the knob here, rotate the knob over. That indexes the next slot for either your 3-fletch or your 4-fletch. Again, you can change it. It's 120 degrees per turn if you're 3-fletch. If you're doing the 90-degree 4, every time you turn this, it's 90 degrees. And so it just indexes the arrow around, and you just clamp on the next vane. Really pretty simple. Basically, the best teacher is putting your hands on this stuff and doing it yourself. It's trial and error to a lot of it. You go in, you'll learn how much glue is too much and how much is not enough. But it just like everything else, it just takes practice. And the end result is you get a whole bunch of arrows to play with. So there's nothing wrong with that. All right, I know at the beginning I said a quick video, but if you're fans of the channel, I don't really do quick videos. If it's worth being done, I put in the time and the words. So, but anyway, that's probably going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. If you're just now getting into the arrow building game, this looks like something you think this is something you want to try, and you have questions, shoot me an email at gripsarchery@gmail.com. Drop me a line. I'll get back to you. Drop a comment down below. I'm usually pretty good at reading and answering those comments. So either way, reach out to me if you got any questions, and I'll help you out to the best of my abilities. So just a reminder, if you've seen my other video, if you like bow hunting and archery stories, my book is out. It's called Behind the Riser. You can find it anywhere books are available in paperback or as an ebook if you have the e-reader. So if you enjoy hunting stories, give that a look. And as always, guys, thanks for watching Grips Archery, and I will talk to you guys later.